What's up, YouTube? It's me, Jesus, again with FuelTech, and today we're going to go over FuelTech's FT Manager, how to set up inputs and outputs, and advanced options in the software. Alright, so just like any standalone ECU, you're going to require some inputs to do whatever function it is you're trying to do, and then outputs to control injectors, ignition coils, boost controller, a shifter, whatever it is you're trying to control. In the software, this is where you set this up. Here's the input setup here, and in this particular one we got a two-step. And these are the inputs that are available. Depending on which ECU you have will dictate how many inputs and outputs are available. FT600 has 20 inputs available. The FT550, 14 inputs available. And this does not include crankshaft or camshaft input. And if you have an old FT500, which is what I use, FT450, that one is only 7 inputs. So the FT450 is limited on outputs. So here you can see how they're grayed out. So there's 6 blue outputs on the FT450 and 4 gray outputs, which are typically used for ignition. So here's a FT600, and the FT600 will use all of them, right? So it's a total of, you got 16, so 32 outputs. Typically the blue ones are used for injectors, and for the people using 16 injector setups, that's what you would use these other ones for. And you can pair these outputs out, but that's how many available outputs and inputs each particular ECU has available. Each output is limited on the amount of current it can carry. Low impedance injectors you can wire straight to the ECU. If you're using obviously low impedance injectors, they do require a injector driver module, which you can run a FT module, injector driver module here. You have the option, you can use any aftermarket one as well, but this one has the ability to, you can do custom peak and holds if you want. You have the option to do custom ones, and it does provide some diagnostics on there as well. And on the right, I'll tell you what each output can carry. So like I said, typically gray outputs are for ignition, blue outputs are for injectors, and then the yellow outputs you can wire in directly and as a power supply, like to control boost solenoids. You can just give it power off the yellow output and ground the other side of it, or you can use it as a ground side where you're giving the component power and grounding it. So you can do that on yellow outputs. Blue outputs you have to use the ground side because I believe they don't carry as much current. So anyways, so here's the input setup would be in here, and you get your typical sensors already preset in here, but here's the list of available inputs. It has pretty much everything you can think of. If you need to do a custom one, there is an option for custom measure type. If you want to name it something differently that's not in there, you have that option as well. To configure it, here's an oil pressure sensor right here, analog input. You can use the default ones. These are just the generic. The PS ones are like the PS150. That's a standard FuelTech one. A lot of the 0 to 150 psi sensors are. This is how they're set up, right? Just like this. You can do a custom one and plug in all these values in here. You know, if you got some ripe sensors, they have that data. You can just fill it in over here on the right side on this table. So you have that option. So this is the input page. Speed sensors, you know, it'd be drive shaft speed, that's a common one. And that would be a frequency on here. And you can set the average points. That'll kind of smooth some stuff out if you get some dirty signal. Some people don't recommend it, so it's really up to you how you want to set that up. And in the input page, you got the map sensor, which all the FuelTech ECUs have a built-in map sensor, 87 psi boost max. So that works out pretty well. The traction type, depending on your application, you choose what you're using. For drive shaft speed, this is kind of the common one. Typically, you set your teeth count here, the wide input, and you can calculate speed by plugging in your gear ratio and tire size. You have the option of doing a slick or a radial size, whichever one you want. And then signal filter, this is just for noise, right? For how you want the signal to look. What else we have? Input shaft speed. And this is how to set up any of the inputs. Like, let's say you're doing a turbo speed sensor, right? And you're using a wide input, so you would put it in here, right? So the turbo RPM 1, right? And it's just because it's a frequency signal, right? The ECU will input that and you set it up in here, and also configure it over here. You tell it how many dividers it has, or the blazer internal blade count, internal sensor signal divider, frequency divider specified by the sensor manufacturer. Okay, so that's a sensor issue. That's a sensor thing you have to set up there. And the quantity of blades is basically however many blades your compressor has. And this is how you would set that particular speed sensor setup. Brake, this is for a brake switch input. And here's all your CAN input stuff. So you can configure a keypad to input any of these that are in this list. They got EGT boxes as well. The cool thing is on these you can configure one of the EGTs is the air temp and like a cylinder head temperature, right? Engine temperature, to bolt it on the cylinder head. And if you're out of inputs, this is a good way to get around that, right? You also have the option of an input expander, which is pretty cool. You get 20 inputs and then 1, 2, 3, 4 frequency inputs, which would be speed sensor inputs. The FuelTech does need a square wave signal input, so if you're picking up a wheel speed sensor that's a AC signal or like a VR signal, you do need a converter to convert that over to the correct signal, to a square wave basically. Here's a switch panel setup. So these are the available switch panels, and then you would click on this and configure whatever you want to do with those particular buttons. The FuelTech does have their own widebands that you can configure. Let's see. And I'm not familiar with those, but you do need to associate them to what what if it's on a particular cylinder or a particular bank. You do need to set that up as well. So there's EGT, generic input. Not sure if oxygen's on here. Oh, here it is right here, left and right. So you need to associate each O2 monitor you have, if you have one or two, to the correct bank so that the O2 closed loop works correctly. Outputs. So just like anything, whatever it is you're trying to control, right? The injector outputs, if the advanced mode is turned off, you can't adjust these, right? These are set up on the previous video I talked about in the fuel injection setup. In here, right? How many outputs you use will dictate that on the blue outputs in here. So these can be opened up and moved around if you screw up on the wiring. I'll talk about that in a minute. But here's the available outputs, right? You know, trans brake, wastegate, boost control, right? Increase and decrease solenoids. You know, that's a common one there. A fuel pump. Right, that's how you would configure it. So let's take, for instance, you're trying to do a boost control, right? That's a really common one. So be wastegate boost controlled, and it tells you here exactly how to set it up, right? We can do time based or validated launch, after validated launch, FT dual block, and here you can set up the output activation, right? So you can use a ground side, which you give the solenoids power, and the ECU grounds it, PWMs it to ground, or you can use the yellow outputs and just give it 12 volts and ground the other side of the solenoids, and that makes for easy wiring. So it'll tell you in here, inputs, outputs related to the feature, right? And if whatever feature you're using in this will tell you exactly, you know, wastegate increase, wastegate decrease, or wastegate 3. These are mandatory, right? Inputs, wastegate pressure, white input, mandatory. So whatever it is you're trying to do, that function in the software will tell you, you know, what inputs are required and what outputs are required. And most of the options that are in here or that will require an input and output setup is activating one of these features, right? Variable valve timing, you know, control the VVT solenoid, and the input's going to be the sensor of that camshaft, and the output's going to be the VVT control solenoid, right? So output signal, actuator solenoid, PWM, right? And then sensor type, there are two options. Cam sync sensor, use the same cam sync sensor as set up using the dedicated cam sync input for the engine, or you can use an analog, right? So you enable it. Cam sync sensor would be what you're using to run the engine, or an analog input, Hall effect. So if it is an AC, say the signal is only a VR sensor, then you would need a converter or change the sensor to a Hall effect. And then the output is here, right? Activated at 0 volts, which you can use a blue output here, or you can use a yellow output to ground, and then you can only use the yellow outputs to feed that component 12 volts and then ground the other side. So that's how you set this particular one up. I'm not going to go into detail about that right now, but like I said, this is just for inputs and outputs. And then let's see here. Alright, so if you notice in the last part of the injectors are grayed out where you can't adjust them, right? So in here, this is for the pin map assignment. You would set that to manual. And then same thing for the ignition coils, right? You can set that to manual. And that'll allow you to go down that side. That will allow you to change these around, right? So let's say you're using a Ford harness, I'm sorry, a Chevrolet harness on a Ford vehicle. I've helped a guy, I was like, hey, just wire this thing up. Like if it was a Chevrolet, plug the injectors as if it was a Chevrolet firing location, and we move the outputs here, and then you can test them. This is to test that particular output, you know, to make sure that it matches the cylinder where you have it at. And so that's the cool thing about the FuelTech as well, is you can test the outputs. So that's on the advanced options, right? Another feature too, which I would suggest personally, is setting up the RPM signal as custom, which allows you to set up an ignition delay in here, right? Because if this is turned off, the advanced features turned off, you cannot make an adjustment to that. And you can set any of these to custom, right? And it tells you right here, enables custom options to change PID for the wastegate boost control, not recommended. And a lot of people don't mess with these, but it's a PID controller, right? A lot of standalone ECUs require you to adjust the PID controller. FuelTech's made it easy for you where you can just do the default stuff, but if you have a situation where you're whatever you're trying to control doesn't operate the way you want it to, then enabling that is, I mean, I'm glad they have that option in there. So let's take for instance here, on wastegate boost control, the only setting you have is this control gain, and it adjusts everything in the background. So with the advanced option, it'll open up so with the advanced option, let's say you have some custom valves, you got some injectors in the boost controller from ProSpeed, right? You can plug in the dead times for those injectors in here, based off their information, and then you can come in here in your settings, right, and then adjust the PID controller, proportional, integral, and derivative, right? Set your output frequency for the injectors you're using, and you're off, right? So that is a good feature that's available. Again, you can use the basic setup. A lot of people get away with it, but it is advisable that you should probably do that. And the same thing applies for the boost control. I mean the O2 closed loop. A lot of people rely on it, and unfortunately, in the FuelTech, it can overshoot and undershoot. That's the reality. Is you need to get your fuel table set up correctly. I mean, the first step in any tuning is for the PID control not to do much work, at least for the fuel side and things where you can control that component, get all that on target before you rely on anything closed loop. Once the closed loop is turned on, it's just kind of there to clean up minor imperfections, or just in the event that something happens, whether fuel pressure drops or what have you. So if you guys had any questions about how to set up the ECU, the configuration, the inputs, a particular sensor you don't know how to set up, how a function works, how to set it up, just shoot me an email or shoot me a message on Facebook, Instagram. I help people out all the time. I don't charge money most of the time, and it's just on my spare time when I can do it. So if you want to work quickly, find somebody that does this for a living. I don't do this for a living, but I do enjoy doing it. I hope that give you some value in some of this information, and just drop me a comment. Let me know what you want to see. If what I'm saying makes sense. If it doesn't, critique it. Let me know what you think. As always, thanks for watching. Comment, like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.